the end of World War II. We mentioned yesterday, I believe, or the day before, about Franklin Roosevelt dying, Hitler's suicide, the end of the war in Europe. But remember, the war is still going on in Japan in the Pacific, and we still have to deal with the Japanese. And we said, look, America had developed a strategy, what we called island hopping. And you can see, you can follow the route, the blue arrows over the years of the war, where Pearl Harbor happens in December of 1941. And then you see we're sweeping down to the south in towards Australia in 1942. Of course, the Battle of Midway, we mentioned that, which is a big turning point. Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk; they couldn't replace those, and that red line was the extent uh, of their empire. They're at their peak at that point, and you can see the Battle of Coral Sea, Guadalcanal, all the way through the Pacific region. America, one by one, is taking back these islands, but it's a bloody mess. Every island the Japanese practically defend to the point where they, you know, like it's to the last man. The Japanese do not want to surrender. Okay, and as we get closer and closer, you can see when we get to Iwo Jima and Okinawa, which are almost in the middle of this graphic, we're close enough to start making bombing runs directly on Japan. Right? And the city of Tokyo, the capital city of Tokyo, we bombed the bejesus out of Tokyo, including civilian targets. But it's not until the summer of 1945 where things are going to get completely wild. And here's what helps end the war. America had been working on a project for several years that we now know as the atomic bomb. All right. And I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, but a lot of people don't understand the concept of what an atomic bomb does. Uh, the elements, certain elements in nature, including uranium and plutonium, are very unstable. And scientists have often thought that if you could split an atom of any kind, it would release a significant amount of energy. Right? And ultimately, scientists were able to figure out how to take uranium, which is a pretty unstable element in nature, and they were like, "Hey, if we can crack these little atoms at the smallest level here, then we can release large amounts of energy and produce a massive explosion." And the United States had been working on this, and the code name for this was the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was the concept of building an atomic bomb. It did not take place in Manhattan. The project was actually spread out through different parts of the country, and it was conducted under heavy secrecy. And we weren't the only ones doing it either. Japan explored the idea. Germany explored the idea. And the really bizarre thing was when Albert Einstein fled Nazi Germany and came to the United States, he wrote a letter to Franklin Roosevelt encouraging Roosevelt to take on this project. He says, "Look, Germany and Japan are already, in particular, he's talking about Germany. He says they're already working on this. This is something that you do not want to lose to them in achieving. You want to be able to build this weapon before they do." And incidentally, Eisenhower's letter becomes the thing that spurs the Manhattan Project. And Einstein himself was not part of the project. A lot of people were still skeptical of his loyalties to the United States because he had once lived in Germany, even though he was a Jew who fled Germany. But that's beside the point. Einstein is someone who inspires the Manhattan Project, but the United States is able to complete this project before Germany or Japan because the vast amount of resources, the fact that our homeland wasn't being bombed, we achieved this. And so the atomic bomb is a weapon where Harry Truman, the new president after Franklin Roosevelt dies, Harry Truman has to make an important decision. Uh, do we use this atomic bomb or not? Because even if you focus on a military target, you would still run into the problem of you would have civilian casualties because it's something like 80,000 tons of TNT is the equivalent explosion, and it's all going to fit into a very small single bomb. So it's a pretty bizarre decision. Now, Harry Truman says this. He knows that we're going to defeat Japan. The question is how quickly. And Harry Truman could basically, he feels like he's pointed in two different directions. One is to use the atomic bombs, and you're going to kill lots of Japanese civilians. All right. But at the same time, you're going to save a lot of American lives because if you don't use the atomic bombs, you will have to invade the homeland, the home island of Japan. And we know that the Japanese are not fond of surrendering. It could be a very ugly battle that's going to take place for quite some time. And on top of that, a lot of American soldiers are going to die. And Harry Truman looks at it like this, that he decides that I would much rather err on the side of saving American lives than Japanese lives. Because he said, look, there's still the possibility that even if we invaded the Japanese homeland, a lot of innocent people will still die in the process. And so Harry Truman authorizes this airplane. The Enola Gay, the pilot there, Paul Tibbets, he named his airplane after his mom, which I think is a little bit strange, but whatever. Okay. Paul Tibbets' airplane here, the Enola Gay, is going to fly the first mission to drop an atomic bomb. These are approximations. These are replicas of what the atomic bombs look like. Incidentally, they have nicknames Fat Man and Little Boy. And uh, Fat Man and Little Boy are the two atomic bombs, and they're not that big in the grand scheme of things in terms of a bomb. And remember, though, uranium, the element uranium, and later on plutonium, which is enriched uranium, those elements by themselves are already unstable and ready to basically explode. And you don't need a lot of them to create a massive explosion. Okay? So on August the 6th, 1945, uh, Hiroshima is the first city targeted for an atomic bomb. And you can see that when the atomic bomb is dropped, you can look at this picture here, and it creates the infamous mushroom cloud. But it's not just a mushroom cloud, it's a giant pillar of smoke and fire. And to give you an idea, and we are going to watch a video on this when we get back, to give you an idea of what happened at the epicenter of the explosion. This explosion caused temperatures of something like 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, that is absolutely crazy to even think about. Now, 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit is so hot that anything near the explosion, the epicenter of the explosion, would get incinerated, vaporized immediately. If you were near the center, you would have just seen a bright flash, and that would have been it, and it would have been over for you. They estimate that somewhere in the neighborhood of 70,000 people are killed immediately. They say estimate because a lot of people are displaced. Individuals who didn't have as accurate records, and of course, a lot of the records from this time are destroyed as well. They estimate 48,000 buildings destroyed, and later on, you're going to see people who die from various problems associated with the atomic bomb. And you don't need to memorize statistics. What I put these up here for is to give you an idea of what it is, or the destructive power of this particular bomb. And it doesn't cover like a very big area in terms of the size, but if you're near that explosion or within a couple miles of it, we're talking about a real bad day for you. Incidentally, too, when the explosion occurs, the force of the energy creates winds or a shock wave of something like 900 to 1,000 miles an hour. So even if you were outside the city a little bit, you would have been knocked down by the shock wave or knocked away quite a bit. Now, the strange thing is that Hiroshima, when it's bombed on August 6th, 1945, uh, the Japanese don't surrender. Right? They don't surrender. 3 days later, we decided to drop another atomic bomb, this one on Nagasaki. This one wasn't as accurate. Hiroshima, that bomb that one was dropped over almost the heart of the city. This one was a little on the outskirts, and so not quite as devastating. But you get the same type of effects from this massive force. You get these temperatures that are red hot, and a lot of people are incinerated. People, their skin is basically marred if they survive it, and some people are going to survive this. and that's one of the things we're going to watch in terms of the video. The people who survive, or the aftermath here, everything gets obliterated around these cities, and you're going to see like here is you can see on the left of the picture there's an American observer after coming in, and seeing the rubble, and it's basically just obliterated. It's amazing that some of the buildings are even standing, but he's just standing in a giant mess. You can see here that most of the city, you can see where a city once was. You can see where the streets were gridded out, but there's so much of the city that's just wiped away. You can see here more of city, what's left or what once was left of a particular city here where it's just wiped out. And I'm talking about total destruction. So, some of this stuff, it's amazing that it survived at all, but the people who survived, their stories are a little bit sadder. You can see right here, incidentally, this a couple of these pictures, and we're going to see a lot more images later on, but on the left, this poor woman, she's got this strange, you can see the burns on her skin, and it's got a funny imprint on it. And the imprint itself is about is probably due to what type of clothing she was wearing at the time. That's why she's got that pattern burn mark, right? And in other situations, you can see on the right a small child here, and hair loss was a common problem that survivors of the atomic bomb have. And people who were atomic bomb survivors not only lost hair, but they developed various forms of cancer because of the radiation. If you don't know, uranium is a radioactive material, and it was spread throughout the air when the explosion occurred. And these individuals, they live their lives with a lot of medical problems that, if they don't kill them, cause problems for them down the road. Many people, especially women, were affected. Women, a lot of times, were unable to become pregnant or had difficult pregnancies. Many of them miscarried on multiple occasions, and not uncommon for these survivors also to experience strange spontaneous bleeding, and that's long after they recovered from the explosion itself. And when you see some of the footage from people in the explosion, it will definitely cause you to rethink some of your ideas about the atomic bomb. Right now, the results of the atomic bomb, eventually Japan decides that it's in their best interest to surrender. August 14th, 1945, you see here the American officials getting ready to sit down with Japanese officials and officially end the war. Japan surrenders unconditionally, and the United States says, you know what, we're ready to move on. In the summertime, we talked about May 8th as VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. August 14th is considered VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day. And Emperor Hirohito, the unconditional, undisputed ruler of Japan, has to sign a surrender. And if that wasn't enough, part of the surrender agreement was he had to admit that indeed he was not God. Now, when we get back, we're going to watch a video, but we're also going to talk about what happens to the Nazis and the Japanese afterwards. And in particular, we'll talk about how the world's got to move on after the war is over. So the war ends in August of 1945. The atomic bombs help put an end to Japan's empire. And hopefully, we'll get to see you guys again tomorrow, and we'll talk more about this. Hope you guys are doing all right at home.